Welcome back live tonight on In Focus, Newzroom Afrika, channel 405. The Taliban takeover in Afghanistan has forced the European Union to have to initiate talks with Taliban as the Afghan crisis remains far from over. EU says that they would like to emphasize on the importance of human rights during their engagement with the Taliban. We talk more on this now. I'm joined by the global governance analyst, Fakude, who will shed more light. Tembisa, good to have you with us tonight. Are you at all surprised by the statement from the EU, or is this the kind of statement you would have expected to come from the EU, that we have no choice but to engage with the Taliban government in Afghanistan if we even want to have any kind of influence in future developments?
It was expected because most governments are doing that. It was first the Dutch government that opened negotiations and discussions with the Taliban, but Americans have also done the same. In fact, they have not withdrawn their embassy in Kabul. They remain in Kabul. So it was expected that the Europeans eventually would have followed suit. And I don't think we are seeing the last of the Western governments wishing to resuscitate relations with the Taliban.
Is this awakening of the Western governments to the realization that nation building is far more complex than they actually thought?
Yes, true. But at the same time, I think the Taliban deserve to be given a chance, notwithstanding that they have a lot of challenges ahead of them. And although they've claimed that they have reformed, we've seen the decisions that they've made in the past, including the government that they've since formed, which does not include any other members of any other party outside the Taliban, one. And also there are no women. One would have expected that they would have at least included a woman in their new interim government. But we still have to wait and see, because the cabinet is not complete yet, so they are moving forward with that. But I doubt if the Taliban will be able to reform as quick as we all expect, because most of them remain very conservative, and they are pushed to this position because they have no choice but to begin to speak the language of the world. They have to begin to attract investment into Afghanistan. And for them to do that, they will have to prove to the world that they have transformed.
Former Spain foreign minister saying that the EU bloc has much more to gain by engaging the Taliban than actually to lose from this new administration. Is that true?
I think so. I mean, Afghanistan, the fact that we've had two major powers fighting in Afghanistan over the years proves that there's a lot to be gained from Afghanistan. They've got very wealth of mineral resources, and all countries are vying for those resources, untapped exploration of mineral resources. So it will be beneficial for the Europeans to move into Afghanistan as they continue to seek the limited resources around the world. But some other countries have already booked their space in terms of priorities. Qatar is one of them, because they've done very well in terms of bringing the Taliban into the table. The Americans, the reason why they're not leaving, because they understand the strategic importance of Afghanistan, and they will continue speaking to the Taliban because they need to be in Afghanistan moving forward.
How do they work around? I mean, you've already mentioned the issue of the human rights violations and the exclusion of women in that government. But what about the inclusion of those who are on the UN sanctions list?
Well, those were the leaders, isn't it? These are the guys who were negotiating for the past 3 years in Doha. So although they're in the terrorist list, not only of the UN, of the US, but also the European Union, but they are the actual leaders of the Taliban. So you can't actually exclude them. They were expected to assume senior roles within the Afghan interim government. But I think what will happen moving forward is that they will be removed from the list, particularly by the United States, so that at least there is a facilitation of nation building and also assisting the people of Afghanistan to move forward.
As far as the droves of people that are moving out, are they likely to see huge numbers of Afghan people moving to the European Union?
Well, many of the Afghans continue to wanting to leave, but there were a lot of opportunists during the earlier days of. I mean, we saw those pictures at the Hamid Karzai airport when people wanted to leave. The call was mainly for the foreign nationals to leave and those who hold American passports. But because there was that opportunity, many Afghans found themselves at the airport. But I think the large number of people who were supposed to leave Afghanistan are already gone. And those that were wishing to leave Afghanistan, who have necessary documentation to travel outside Afghanistan, have done so. The majority that remain in Afghanistan are those that will be seeking political asylum, fearing that there might be some backlash from the Taliban. But the Taliban has already said that let bygones be bygones. They are going to be starting anew, and they will ensure that those who worked with the enemy in the past are protected. But it's also good for the Americans and the Europeans, because we don't want another flood of refugees coming into Europe, and it'll be difficult to reach Americans because Americans are protected by the Atlantic Ocean. But in Europe, they could easily walk to Europe. So it's important that they encourage the Taliban and make sure that there's peace and stability in that country to avoid a flood of refugees into Europe.
Joseph Borrell saying the Afghan crisis is not over, which begs the question, of course, what is the current situation? How dire is the situation, and what's happening on the ground as far as humanitarian assistance being allowed in and so on?
Well, the UN Food Programme is saying that there is a need for aid with immediate effect. In other words, if there's no aid coming into Afghanistan, we are likely to face famine in large proportions. So there is a need for money to start flowing into Afghanistan. There's a need for more aid to start flowing into Afghanistan, because the main employers, which were the United States and the NATO members, have since left. So there's a huge number of people who have lost their jobs because the Americans and the Europeans were not only employing those people that used to work for them, but there was a lot of indirect employment as a result of the presence of Americans and Europeans. And when they left with all of those opportunities. So there is a need now to resuscitate the economy, bring in new initiatives that will provide employment for the ordinary Afghans. And that will take injection of investment, the release of the money that's been withheld by the European banks. The IMF, for example, has got some of the deposits of the Afghan government held. The World Bank has the same. So those funds will have to be released so that at least the economy of Afghanistan can be given a boost and resuscitated.
Finally, the EU describing the abrupt pullout of the US in Afghan as a tragedy. What does that tell us about their posture?
Well, the EU is blaming the US, but for some of us who are observing from afar, we're blaming both the EU, in other words, NATO, and the US for abruptly leaving Afghanistan. So I'm not quite sure whether the EU can stand confidently and criticize the Americans, because they were part and parcel of that decision. I mean, they did the same as soon as the Americans left. Of course, we know that the Americans were a much more bigger power, occupying certain key positions in Afghanistan. But the EU did the same. When the Americans left, they also left. But yeah, to an extent, you can't blame the Americans to say yes, because they had a much more greater mandate and power. The abrupt departure from Afghanistan created problems. But, from where I sit as an outsider, I blame both the NATO and the US for abruptly leaving the Afghanistan and leaving the people of Afghanistan to fend for themselves.
Global governance analyst there with us, Ebrahim Fakude. Appreciate your time and thank you very much for coming through.